Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show, looking to break down how much I need to retire. And Jason, really excited for this episode to bring you in. How you doing? How was your week?
Yeah, doing good. Week's good. I feel like we say that every episode. We're excited for every episode.
We are. We are.
And this one should be a good one. We're just going to talk about how much do I need to retire? It's a common question that people have, right? Do I have enough? Can I retire? And emotions get involved, but we're going to talk through the analytical side of things where we're going to figure out, you know, what's the formula you use to determine if you have enough to take that step to retire?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of assumptions that get made in this scenario and these equations, right? So we're just going to talk through high level stuff. So one of the things that you're going to want to do, which depending on where you're at, whether you're just getting started in retirement saving, or maybe you're on the tail end of work and you're getting ready to retire, you're going to start trying to figure out some of those major expenses that might arise in retirement. So Jason, let's start off with some of those. What do those look like?
Yeah, so when you're projecting out, right, you want to figure out how much do I need to retire, meaning how much money do I need to cover my expenses, and part of that is the necessities and part of that's the fun stuff, right? The travel, the entertainment.
True.
And you got to couple that all together to find your magic number of how much do you project you're going to need on a monthly or annual basis uh, to live the retirement that you want to live. And the essential stuff in there, and I hate saying essential because the entertainment and travel and all that stuff is great too. But when I say essential, it's the stuff required to maintain just a decent, lifestyle and living. And what I mean by that is food, your health care, your transportation, your utilities, stuff along those lines. Um, and the entertainment and the travel and the fun and that kind of stuff, you want to add that into the equation of your expenses in retirement. But I would say it's okay to separate it, right? So you can figure out, okay, maybe I separate my fun from my essential number, right? And so I like starting with the clients I work with just let's figure out the essential number. What do we absolutely need? And every person's lifestyle is different. So somebody's needs or wants in retirement could be luxurious compared to somebody else's, or vice versa, right? Everybody has a different standard of living that they expect in retirement. But let's figure out what that is, figure out what that number is, and let's separate that fund number for just a second, right? The entertainment, the traveling, and we can see how much we can allocate to that after we've determined that our basic needs and lifestyle is met. Now, this is my approach to it. There's a lot of different approaches to it. Paul, I'm sure you do something slightly different, and the next person does something slightly different. But this is kind of how I look at figuring out those expenses.
Yeah, and really, like, realistically, like, it's a best guess, right? I mean, the goal isn't to have like precise exact numbers, because it's a moving target in a lot of senses. I mean,
Sure.
even over the last couple of years, inflation has really pushed some of these things a lot higher than we would have anticipated, right? So again, all we're trying to do is establish a best guess, right, to give us a number or a monthly goal, right, which it could be a moving target in time.
Right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I like
exactly.
and I like that too. And the further away you are from that retirement date, just the harder it is to project.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think they can dial it in 20 years out. And it's just, I mean, what you think's going to happen next year probably won't happen, let alone 20 years down the road, right?
I mean, that's so true. So again, the reality is it's a best guess. It's a moving target, but it's something that we try to set as one of the assumptions in our equation,
Sure.
right? And so for a lot of our listeners, right, they might have a pension, right, from the FERS or the ERS or something like that, that gives them a lot of fixed or secure monthly stable income.
Right.
um, and that based off of how we were, and we've talked about how to calculate that and things like that in previous episodes, but like figuring out like what does that cover, like is that actually able to cover those fixed needs, right? Like, okay, great, like we have we have the, essentials, right? Or the necessities, as you said, right? Covered. So just, how do we evaluate, maybe some thought process on that? Like, if you have, a pension or Social Security, what are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah. So the next step of the formula or calculation for me is we got the minimum expenses to maintain our lifestyle and retirement. Now what we look at is our Social Security and our pension and our secure, steady, monthly inflation adjusted income. And we say, we subtract the two and we figure out whether we're at a deficit or a surplus.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Hawaii, they might have rental income. And I think rental income is pretty secure. I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think you can include that in your steady
For sure.
retirement income. But you come up with that number outside of your IRAs, your 401ks, your TSPs, your 403bs. Separate those for now and just figure out with Social Security and any pension, if you do have the pension, or any rental income, how much of a surplus or a deficit do I have when I compare that to my, minimum lifestyle expenses? And that gives us a number that we can work off of when we move to the next step, which would be if we have a deficit or surplus, this is where our retirement accounts are going to come into play, right? Our IRAs, the 401ks, 403bs, TSPs, and even cash or whatever, if you have alternative investments, whatever it might be, right? This is where that comes into play. And you're going to take a look at those retirement assets. And this is where the real art and the thinking comes in, is how can I maximize these retirement assets to satisfy the deficit in most cases, the deficit, and make that money last throughout my whole retirement. Now, if you're one of these fortunate people, me and Paul, we both met a lot of people. Maybe a husband works for the federal, a spouse works for the state. You got 2 Social Securities and 2 pensions, and you're in a surplus situation with your IRAs and your TSP. Great. That's that. Now it's a matter of managing the fun, right? The entertainment, because that's what that's money for. So I think figuring out those things, deficit, surplus, and then you kind of bring it to your retirement assets, your retirement accounts. How can I manage these throughout my retirement to account for my deficit, or what's my plan if I am fortunate enough to have that surplus, right?
Right. Absolutely. And, so like, in that example you gave, I think it's maybe not an uncommon one, but especially in Hawaii, where they have maybe 2 options from pensions from maybe the federal and the state. But, with that, like if you have a surplus, right, you can start thinking about like, what are things that you want to do, right? Maybe you want to travel. Even if you have a deficit in that respects, like if you have, the nest egg, if you have saved enough elsewhere outside of those, secure incomes, that's where you start figuring out like, okay, like if I pull out, or if I start to, draw or withdraw these different amounts year after year after year, how long is this bucket of money going to last, right? And that's where the real, like you said, the art comes in, and just understanding how to manage that variability, right? Because with pension and Social Security, there's a lot of there's security in that it's not going to really go away, right? Hopefully, it's only going to steadily grow based off of cost of living type of things. So it's not going to be like these variable amounts. Whereas how much we can pull out each month or each year from these variable accounts like the TSP or 401k or 403b, that's where it starts to be fun to, especially when I work with clients, like, okay, like, is this going to be a period of time where we're going to be doing more or less, right? And we kind of talked about that a little bit in our episode 20, right? Stages of financial life, where we talked about, that go, slow go, and no go, right? So it just depends on where you're at in retirement, right? Health and all that kind of stuff. But
Sure.
I don't know, let's talk about some maybe industry averages or some things that maybe came up recently, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
what
So
would be an industry normal
what your
withdrawal
point,
rate?
what I think you're pointing to is a hot topic in the advisory space, or just in the withdrawal strategy debate, is a well-known person came out, and typically the industry standard for a long time was 4%. Like it, agree with it, disagree with it, it's been the 4% rule, right? It's very well known. You take your nest egg and you can withdraw 4%, and adjusted for inflation over, and your nest egg shouldn't run out, right? I would urge our listeners, look into different withdrawal strategies, look up the 4% rule, but it's been very common. But lately, there's been a lot of discussion on, is it 3%? Is it 5%? And someone recently came out and said 8%, which caused a whole bunch of stir because people are saying, well, that's way too much. And truth of the matter is, you can back test this stuff through financial software and see how does it hold up. But ultimately, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know future returns. We don't know, specific situations within individuals. So is 8% wrong? I can't say that. I wouldn't advise people to go that route. And I'm not giving financial advice here on the show, but there's so much debate about what is a safe withdrawal rule. That it really becomes an art instead of a science, and it's really hard to pin down right or wrong, yes or no. And coupled with that, there's a lot of other withdrawal strategies available to you. There's something called a guardrail strategy. There's a few others out there, and I think for each individual, they got to figure out what one works best for them. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, I'm sure the way I approach, withdrawals in retirement is slightly different than maybe Paul and the next advisor. And it's just finding one that you feel comfortable with, that you can ride out in your retirement. What are your thoughts there, Paul?
Yeah, and I mean, for me, this, how do we even get to 4% or 6% or, 8%, right? And, for me, a lot of it is, it's going to be an assumption, right? Like,
Right.
we're going to assume that we can get some level of rate of return year after year after year that would be able to, pull out from our nest egg, right? So we're not necessarily pulling from, the principal investment or the capital that we have at the end. So again, if we're making an assumption, like, some out there are making, something like 12+%, on an annual return, so that's why there's this, loophole, or this, not loophole, I shouldn't say that, but this increased percentage, right? Where it's now we can withdraw 8%. But the reality, and where we agree, is maybe, that's a really high, aggressive return, portfolio, right? Where it's like, hey, maybe we're in retirement, maybe we should be looking at, more conservative investments, which would bring down that slightly. And 4% is kind of in a safe, withdrawal strategy, right? And so really, it's more so to me than anything, it's like, where are we at in life, right? Like, because maybe you're just getting started in retirement, and a higher percentage, or you're withdrawing a little bit more because you're early in retirement. Whereas,
Right.
when you get to maybe, 75, 80, it's going to be a lot slower, right? Maybe you're just living off of your fixed incomes, right? So again, it just depends on where you're at, what you have, right? Like we've talked at the top of the show, like, do you have a pension? Do you have Social Security? So again, all those things are related. And like we said, like, it's a lot of assumptions being made. But it gives us a target, right? It gives us a goal that we can kind of shoot towards and see what we want to do.
Yeah, I really like what you said there. It definitely depends on which stage of retirement you're in my opinion. And then and also too, one thing we didn't touch on with the withdrawal strategy is whether 4%, 3%, 5%, 8%. A lot of it is predicated on, how you're invested and what your returns are. If you can't take an 8% withdrawal strategy if you're invested in 90% cash.
Yeah.
You have to be invested in something that's going to provide a return to extend that nest egg throughout your whole retirement.
Right. And, just to also understand, like, there is a consideration and a correlation to maybe you have, maybe you as maybe a husband and wife or a couple, or, you're thinking about, like, oh, what do I want to leave behind? Right. Is there an inheritance? Is there, charity, that y'all want to give things to? So, your withdrawal strategy, is correlated to that as well. Like, are you wanting to leave something behind? Or, and other things that we can talk about is, how are we positioned maybe to handle any unforeseen expenses, right? Maybe there's a, a health change, or maybe there's, a move change. Maybe there's, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, right? So it's, again, those are things to consider, right? So any thoughts to add to that?
No, absolutely is, some things we didn't talk about is, what's the plan for long-term care, and long-term care and health costs can be extremely expensive in retirement, even with insurance. And so that's a big one you have to factor in. And like you said, if your plan is to leave your kids with X amount of dollars, then you got to factor that into the equation when you start, planning out how you're going to manage your nest egg in retirement. Um, and I think having an adequate cash reserve and emergency fund
Yeah.
is critical. And for everybody, that's a little different. There's obviously rules of thumbs, but it's what do you feel comfortable with? Um, some people want to maximize every dollar in investments and return, and I get that. But some people, they like the peace of mind of cash, and cash is an asset.
Yep.
Some people undervalue cash at times, right? And having the right amount for yourself and your retirement plan is a great thing. Um, I think one thing we didn't touch on enough, maybe for our listeners to keep in mind when you're figuring out how much do I need to retire, is inflation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk a little bit about how inflation factors into all these things here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, like, inflation is, what is the cost of, a gallon of milk going to cost in 20 years? Well, there's rules of thumb, right? There's, inflation over, over time, right? Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3%. And, the federal government has goals and targets, but, as most of us know, and as I said, a little bit earlier in this episode, it's, we didn't expect, inflation to go through the roof in a lot of these different things, right? Like, cars went up really, really high. Even real estate went really, really high, right? So we didn't anticipate this huge balloon of inflation. So really what inflation is just a drag on return, right? So like today, it might cost you X amount of dollars to buy something, but if we need to, do it in, 5 years from now, or even 20 years from now, like, we want returns in our investments to outperform inflation so that we can have the same purchasing power, right? So maybe that's a term that you've never heard before, but purchasing power is your ability to purchase in the future, in a period of time, right? So again, really just inflation is, it's there, it's gonna happen, right? Like, in so many different areas and goods, it's no longer the same price, right, for the same thing before. So inflation is going to happen, and it's just a drag on your, a pullback on some of the purchasing power in that. So I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add there. That's how I
No.
look at it.
And what I see the most common mistake regarding inflation and figuring out how much I need to retire is you figure out how much you need to retire today,
Yeah.
even though you plan on retiring in 10 years from now. And you're not factoring in car insurance is going to go up, your phone bill's going up, your property taxes. And like Paul said, the gallon of milk, you know, you got to figure out what that inflation number is you're going to plug into your calculation to find out what your future needs are, not your need to retire now, unless you're at retirement now. And then that makes it very easy, right? You can see now, but you still need to project out the
Right.
things you need to know. Things are going to get more expensive.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't foresee a world in which things start getting cheaper.
Yeah. No. And to that point, like, how much do I need when I retire is not like there might be a specific age or date that you choose to retire, but we're not stopping at retirement, right? We're like, you have decades left in our life, right? So we don't only want to project to when we retire, right? We're projecting through our life, right? So maybe that's 90, maybe that's 100, right? Who knows, right? But so that's the other thing that I would say, which isn't really necessarily something we're going to talk about, but like, we're not projecting to, like, 65 or 70, right? We're
Right.
projecting through your whole life. And yeah, so if you're at retirement, you still want to include an inflation number in there because you still have, decades left, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Is we use the word retirement as if it's a defined term, right? But some people's retirement is 40 years, some people's are 10 years. Some people work part-time and retire. Some people never retire. They just want to downshift a little bit, right? So
Yep,
all these things factor in to figuring out, your unique situation.
absolutely. So, I mean, any last thoughts?
No, I think that's a good place to end it. There's you can only control what you control in this equation of figuring out how much you need to retire. You can always look at, cutting expenses if you in retirement, if you are at a deficit. I know that's hard to do. Or saving more. But there's a lot of variability in this. Everybody's situation's unique and different, and you just got to think it through, do your research, and hope for the best.
Absolutely. And you know what? There's always amazing people out there, professionals like Jason and I, who work with clients on a daily basis, helping to answer these questions, right?
Sure.
So, just thank you, Jason, for this episode. Enjoyed talking about, what it would look like, how much do I need to retire. And again, thank you, listeners, for continuing to listen with us. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us, and we look forward to our next episode. Have a great day.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta, Paul McWilliams, and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial or Inspire Advisors. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration. And for Paul McWilliams, investment advisory services are offered through Inspire Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC.